Okay, beautiful. We're recording. So this is it. We have H1 and we have H1. Now, if I take this out, for example, let me take this out, for example, I return everything to what it looked like before. So here we have hello world and hello world and another heading. Inline styling. Let me do an inline style very quickly. Style equals color red. Observe something very quickly. Only the first one gets affected by this new styling I have added. Now, if I add a styling to this other H1 and I say color blue, this color becomes blue. Now, this is me giving each of them individual styles. Each of them individual styles. Now, the structure for writing a style is style. Then we have the name of the property you want to modify. The name of the property you want to modify could be anything. Could be color, could be font size, could be font family. There are a lot of it. I think of these three schools, we have a reference for it. Probably after this class, I could forward the reference to the admin. The reference of all the what's the name now? The reference of all the properties that could be used and items could be modified. Now, another easy way to get these properties could be let's see something. This will actually give me what I'm looking for. So style, yes, these are properties. Display, height, margin, padding, width, order, color, left, position, top, background color. All these are properties that can be modified. Now, the modification of these properties have different values. So for example, color would not always be red. Color would not always be red. Color can be any color, which means that color is a property. And then whatever you put on the right-hand side of this structure is the result, or is the value of that particular property you are changing. So for example, I could say victory. Now that is a property, right? That's a person now, which is the element. That's the element H1. Victory. What is her color? Probably I could say yellow. Height. Width. What is her height? What is her width? So let me do this red. I can now say height. I can put a height. I can say width. I can have a width. And it goes on and on and on. But we need to understand something here, that there are some properties that work for text. There are properties that work for images. There are properties that work for empty divs, span, and for any empty elements. There are properties that work for different elements and for different situations. The properties that work for lists, they're the ones that work for tables, they're the ones that work for forms. Now, looking through that reference, that CSS reference I was mentioning, would give you a full grasp of the properties that exist and that can be modified, right? So this is inline. In this case, the property I want to modify here is color, and I say style. Now this style is always constant. This style here now serves as an attribute. I think one of the classes Mr. Dana mentioned attribute. So style at this point becomes an attribute. So in this case, we have style, color, and then we put the value. So color here is the property, and then red here is the value. Style, color, and blue. Now this semicolon here separates one property value pair from the other. If you don't have it, you would have issues. So we can say text decoration, for example, and you say underline. You observe that it's already looking weird. That's because something is missing, and that is that semicolon. For most of you that have come across web development memes or memes, I don't know how they pronounce that stuff, memes or memes, you always hear the jokes about the importance of the semicolon. I just showed us one right now. This is how important it is. Just the semicolon out of this makes this guy not to work anymore. So text decoration underline. I have just underlined this item. So it's just for you to be able to pick out. I think I will still send that particular reference. look at those references, you will get to understand what property can be changed with what value. Like this text decoration now, underline could be something like, instead of underline, we can have something like overline. We can have something like strike through, or something like strike through. How did this spell this strike through? Line, is it line through or strike through? Line through, I think. Yes, line through, line through. So these are properties. But now you cannot write color and say line through. It would not work, because line through, it is not an acceptable value for color. It's not an acceptable value for color. So every property has an acceptable value. This color now, I cannot come and put 12 pixel. No, it will not understand what I'm writing, because color has an acceptable value. So as I will repeat what I said, style has a property and value pair, and every property has an acceptable kind of value. Yes, there are some that have specific values that are already pre-edited, and the system just recognizes once you have this value, it will work. Once you don't have it, work. For example, line through, if I decide to spell it like this, it won't work. It worked. Glory to God. It didn't even work. It didn't work. That's because this guy is this. Let me take this guy out and see it won't work. It won't work. It doesn't even understand what I'm writing anymore. Everything is all scattered. Why? Because I am writing a non-acceptable value. Even if I write the right value, it won't still work. Now, that is for inline. That settles it. Now, external and internal seem to be a little more complicated, because that now involves giving things names, giving items names. It now involves giving items names. For example, I need to style this particular hello world. Let me restore it back to the way it was. It worked fine. Let's go back. Thank you very much. Now, I want to style just this hello world. I have to find a way to name it. I want to style just another heading. I have to find a way to name it. But I can actually name them as a group. For example, I have element H1, element H1, yes, and probably let me have a P. Let me add a P. This is a paragraph. Hello world, another heading, and this is a paragraph. Now I have a H1 and a H1, and I want all the H1s in this particular system to have the same kind of outlook. I want to give them the same body fits, right? So internal, let me start with internal first. Internal now has style as a tag, and then I can go ahead and say H1 as an element name, H1, and I say color red. Automatically everything that is H1 in the system becomes red, because I have given it the color red. Now, if I say text decoration and I say underline, everything H1 picks this styling and affects it on everything H1. Everything H1. Now, but in some situations, this H1 has a different feel to this H1. And I don't want to I don't want to start styling it in here, because probably I'll tell you that actually styling inline is not very recommended. It's not very recommended. That's actually the truth. It's not very recommended. But I don't need to style inline. So what I could do is I could use any of the very many CSS selectors pattern. So I can decide to either use name, class, ID, or I can even select it by number. For example, there is 1 and there is 2 H1 in this system. Now I can decide, I say H1 and I say nth child 1, and I say color blue. Now what has it done? What did I just write? I've said, okay, yes, of all the H1s in this system, the first child, which is nth child now, nth child, nth, that's numbered child. I don't know, those I did mathematics to understand nth. We'll talk about the nth value here. Now, nth child, I will say 1, which means we are saying the nth number, how do I explain this nth now? In mathematics, it's more like when you're talking about AR raised to power n. So n is like a recurring value, a certain number. It's just a random number. We don't even know what the number is. So we're saying whatever number we put here, recognize that number. So H1, nth child. What number of child should I apply this styling to? The first child, which is 1. That is why it's applying it only to this one, because it has checked this is the first, second, and third. Now, this does not style a particular element, it styles a numbered element. Because if I change this one to become the first child, it will automatically style that one as blue. So it is more concerned about an nth child. It is not concerned about a particular element or a particular item. It's just about, okay, I'm looking for H1 and I'm looking for the first H1 and I'll give the first H1 this particular style. That is what this selector stands for. Now, a wiser option would be a class. So I want to style H1. I can now add what we call a class. And now the class is a name of some sort. I want to give it a name I can specifically identify this element itself. So I can call it H1 text. Now, classes when it comes to external styling or internal styling are identified using the dot notation. So we have H1 text and we say color blue. So at this point, even if I change the location of this text, it is concerned about styling this guy. It is no longer concerned about styling a particular positional element. It is styling a particular element. So I don't know, Victory, do you understand to this point? Hello, Victory. Do you follow to this point?
Yes, sir.
You follow to this point, right? Okay, perfect. Now, awesome. So in another way you can actually achieve this is now using what we call IDs. But this is the thing, you can only have one ID per time in a document. Yes, you should only have one ID because IDs are unique. Classes can be multiple, as many as possible. You can have like multiple items have the same class. For example, this is H1 text. I can still have this P have the same class, H1 text. You observe my paragraph 2 has become blue in color. Now, what that makes us understand is that the class can be so many. Rather, we can use many elements, the same class. Now, but ID is something different. It has to be unique. One, I will do something very intentional here. I will use the same name for class and the same name for ID. Remember, I say class is identified using dots and ID is identified using hash. H1 text. And then I can now say color. Let's use chat, whatever the name is. Green. Now let me interest us. Even if this color looks horrible, please let me use green. Yeah. Now let me interest us. Even if I add ID to another element, it will work. That's because there's this statement in our holy book as Christians. It says, in the days of ignorance, there is forgiveness. So in these times, when we're just starting out and you decide to change this to ID, let's say make this ID, it will work. But I tell you this, if you get used to doing this, when you get to JavaScript, you are going to struggle a lot. Because by the time you start using things like get elements by ID, and you want to now specify and do something with just this particular element, you discover that it's also affecting this element. So that's why it's important that ID is only for one element per time. Do we follow to this point, please? If you follow to this point, good. Thank you very much, Give David. Follow to this point, please indicate Victory. Thank you. Okay, Saida, thank you. Sophia, Martha, awesome. So let's move on. Now we'll move on to the external. Remember the illustration I gave at the beginning? In this external, I am now going to bring.
Please, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Vivian.
Please, I want to understand something. Does it mean that we cannot have two ID on the same HTML file? Like, since we already have H1 ID high text, maybe this maybe another ID for another element. I could say H1 H1 paper, something like that. Is it not possible?
So I didn't get that.
I was asking, like, in an HTML file,
Okay.
can we have more than one ID? Like, since we already have H1 ID, H1 text. So I'm wondering, can we also have like maybe PID? Let's say P paper for the ID name, something like that. I don't know if you get the question now.
Yes. Now, as long as the ID name is not the same, you can have multiple IDs. The
Okay,
problem with the ID is the name should just not be the same. Yeah,
okay.
we can have
Thank
multiple
you.
IDs, but the name should not be the same. And please note, one element should not have two IDs. One element should not
Okay,
have two IDs. It's just like you cannot have two, like your name is Vivian Elechuku. Can imagine now your name is Vivian Elechuku and your name is still Joanne Amadi, just to you. It doesn't happen. So you need to have one ID. Inside the ID,
okay.
it can only can contain one data. It shouldn't contain more than two, more than one rather. It should just be one. But for class, it can actually contain more than one class. It can contain more than one class. But for ID, it should not be more than one.
But in this instance now, the class name and the ID, they are the same.
Yes. That is why
So
both
this one
of
can
them,
also pass. Okay.
that is why we have identifiers for them. I remember I said class is dot and ID is hash. So even if the names
Okay.
are the same, the identifiers have separated them.
I get. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, please? Anyone with question? Okay, perfect. So let's now go to external styling. Now with the makeup example I gave earlier, makeup analogy I gave earlier rather, I am now going to bring in decoration. I'm sorry, call it decoration. Forgive me, please. Bring in makeup items from an external source. Now that external source could be Ronke here. So I can now say H1 text, H1 text, I say color red. This is me reaching out to Ronke and telling Ronke that I need to color my H1 text red. I need a red wig, for example. I need a red wig, for example. But at this point, all I have done is inform Ronke. Even if Ronke brings this color to my door, just like it's in this case, I still cannot access that red wig. That is why even when I've applied this color H1 text to this H1 text here, it is still not working. I can refresh from now to tomorrow, it will not work. I need to open the door and connect both of them. And that is where we have something we call link. Link href style.href css. So this link here is what gives us the opportunity to connect this CSS with this HTML. Without this, whatever we are doing here will not reflect properly. Will not even reflect at all. So what we need to do now is to open this door and bring a link in. Now, in this linking, this is where the same, I don't know if you remember what we did with respect to importing images to your HTML. That same structure, what happens here? We're coming out of here dot slash style.css. When we do that, you see that it works now. Is anyone confused with what just happened? Hope no one is
Yes,
confused
sir.
with what just happened. Someone is confused.
Yes, sir. Please, you can redo it.
Okay. At what point did you get confused, please?
The linking part.
The linking part. Okay. So let me go over it again. So, but you understand up to writing this, right? Chinedu, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is the linking side part here. Just like in one of your first classes, you know about tags, you know about elements. So we have a tag called link. It's a tag called link. And this link has an attribute called link has an attribute called rel. Now rel is basically you saying what kind of link would this be? It's called a style sheet kind of link. And then where is this style sheet link existent from? That is basically how it is. So we have a link. What is the relative of this link, right? What's the relationship? What are you connecting this link to something? It's a style sheet. Now href just specifies the source. Remember we talked about href and anchor tags. I don't know if you remember that class very well. Href and that's anchor, just basically links. So I still revert. What we did when we tried to import images to our HTML document was just simply /style.css and then this imports. Are you still confused?
No, sir. No, sir. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I think it's safe to say I've done some justice to the conversation around inline, internal and external CSS. Is it safe to say that Victory and everyone else?
So please, I
Or
have
their
a
further,
question.
please go ahead, Vivian.
Yeah, why is it not just slash style.css? Why do we have the dot before the slash?
Okay, so when you say /style.css, as much as it most likely would work, it most likely would work. If you get used to writing like this, when you start writing React, you would struggle with certain things because slash takes you back to the root. Do you understand? It takes you back to the root. And I can tell you for certain that your folder structure would not be like this. We'll definitely have something like index of HTML. Then you have something like a folder where you have CSS. Sorry, you have CSS. And then most probably this guy will be inside here. So in this case, you would have CSS /style.css, knowing fully well that you are going to the root. I don't know if you understand. So if you're just having just slash this, you are playing with the root, and this is very dangerous because if you get to do some advanced routing, this might give you issues. So to be safe, you just know that you are coming out of this folder and you are going to your next available folder. That way, it saves you from every form of risk. That's just the point. It's just a risk management system. So you don't run into errors eventually sometime soon. I don't know if you get that.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay. So any further questions? Okay, so we can continue, right, for today. Okay, so the box model, has been explained already, so I wouldn't go there. So let's talk about backgrounds and borders. Backgrounds and borders, right? Now, in CSS, backgrounds has a sequence of values. So I'm just going to list them out using my style here. I'm going to list them out and then try to explain them one after the other. Background, we have fixed, we have scroll. You can ignore these other guys. So these values are not, no, let's not use these values. Let me just get to the values quickly for background. I'll type them out very quickly. Okay, so we have for background we have background color, we have background image, we have background repeat, we have background attachment, we have background position, and we have just background. In this case, background is a shorthand for all of them. So you can actually have everything here. What that means is you can have everything here, this one property. Now, these are the properties that exist when it comes to background. So we can have background color, we have background image, we have background repeat, background attachment, background position, and background, which is as a shorthand value. Now, remember I said something some time back that there are some properties that are specific to certain values, what's the name now? Sorry, there are some values that are specific to certain properties. So like we have H1 text. Now in this H1 we can now see background color, and in this background color we can see the background color is aqua. Now this has changed the background color of this particular element. Now background image is a little deeper, considering the fact that what you need now is background. This is the syntax, background image URL. This URL is meant to contain the image you want to use as a background. So we are building a site, and the image there is not the background, rather, is not a box color. It's not a box color. It's what's the word now? It's an image that is there. For example, let me just copy this. I want to copy an image and put it in my project folder. Where do I get pictures from? Okay, I think this would work. So folder called images. I put this. Okay, so fruits.webp. Awesome. Now I want to have an image instead of a color. So that's where I now have background image URL. Then this URL I can say dot slash, dot slash images slash fruits.webp. Observe something now. The background is no longer the color, it's now an image. Now I'll introduce it's a property quickly called height. And I can say this height is 300 pixels. Perfect. Permit me to do something very quick. Let me increase it to 800 pixels. I want to show us something good. I'm increasing the count to show us something. The next property called background attachment. So background attachment, scroll, for example. What happens now is that the background at some point, I have enough content here. The background at some point is meant to move with the page. The content remains, but it moves to the page. I wish we had more content that would have actually been very visible, but we don't have enough content for that. Now, background repeat. In some cases, you can use an image that is small, and the image now has this divides itself into boxes in that same container. Let me see if I have a small image. Let me see if I have a small image I can use. This image is small. Let's see this image is what I needed to do. Font 6, okay. Font 6.png. Okay, so this is what I mean. Now, in this case, what has happened is that the background has repeated itself. Why? This particular image we're using as the background cannot cover this background at once. So what did he do? He just decided to just create tiles. Just created tiles. But I can eliminate that by using what we call background repeat and say no repeat. It eliminates every other thing. Every other one that was there, it does not repeat that particular background, but still, this background has not spread itself properly. That is where we now need something called background size. Now, background size has several values. You can decide to use contain, cover, a particular aspect ratio. So if I use cover, for example, the image tries to cover across the system. I see a hand up. Okay. it covers, or I can say contain. Contain, the image just contains itself in that particular container. It doesn't overstretch itself. Now I can actually say 100%, 100%, and it just stretches just like contain. So those are the basic sizes you'll be using when it comes to background. So we can now let me return this to contain, so I can do the next one, which is background position. Background position, and then I can say center. Then the background goes to the center. Let me return the other image so you see that how that works. Wait. So you see it has is observe the contain now. The image, the background image just fits in. It just fits in. If I go to cover, it stretches just like the word cover. It tries to cover the overall width and height and everything. It would repeat to cover the screen. Okay, Saida, do you understand it now? Do you understand the explanation from when what Iklas just said? Okay. Okay, so let's go over that again very quickly. Let's go over that very quickly. Let's go over that very, very quickly. So sometimes, but this rarely happens, but in cases where you work with very interesting designers and they give you some small images, they give you very small images, and those images do not cover the width and the height of that particular container you're working with. This is called a container. In the case of this phone 6. Phone 6.3. Like in this case, oh sorry, let me take out all these guys. Good. Now, in this case, what happened here is this: the size of this image here is small compared to this other image that we used before. In this case, this image cannot effectively cover this space that is given. It cannot, because of the actual size of the image. So what HTML automatically does, or what the browser automatically does, is that it outlines that background in tiles automatically. Like you don't need to set it. Saida, do you understand to that point? If you can unmute, that would be nice. Do you understand to that point? Do you understand why it has tiles like this? Good. Now, but depending on what you are trying to implement, you might not want it to tile like this. So what you need to do is you have something called background repeat, and you now say no repeat. Once you do that, it removes every other repetition of that background. Do you get to this point? Awesome. Now you can actually now manipulate the size of the background, because if you notice, it's just one-sided. But I beg you to know that this image it's not just this box. It's not just like this. There is it has some white border. If I should put a background color, say green, you see that this image has some white border. I just want you to see that part that has some white border, right? Otherwise, you would have seen this phone would have just been up here and all that. So that's taking care of that. So we can now have what we call background size. And this background size, we can either contain. Once we have contain, what happens is it automatically fits itself into that particular height, but it doesn't stretch. It fits itself into the height, but it doesn't stretch. Just more like it just fits itself to its best aspect ratio in that container. Now, aspect ratio is most of the times always measured from height first. Sometimes it's measured from height first. It fits the height and balances the width. Or in the case where the height and width are specified, sometimes it just decides to span the width and then balance the height. depending on which of them you are specifying per time. So background size contain, or I can say background size cover. So what does it do at this point? It just stretches itself to make sure that it covers the space that exists in that system. Cover and contain. Say that, do you understand to this point now? Because I think I'm doing everything background. Perfect. Thank you very much. So I'm going to delete all these guys apart from height. I'm going to delete this and delete this apart from height. But now I'm going to do something. I'm going to say background and say URL /////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////// Does not repeat, and I can say cover, and it covers. Why are you working? Contain, let's use contain then. Background size does not follow, my background size does not follow in that particular order. So background size, contain, and we have this. So at this point, I am not specifying separate image or separate background repeat. This is a shorthand for all those values I mentioned earlier for background attachment and all those other items. So in this background here, right? In this background here, you can either specify, I'm going to use the things you can specify here. You can specify the background color. You can specify the background color. You can specify the background image. You can specify background image. You can specify background repeat. You can specify background position. And specify background position. So these are the basic things that you can specify. And background attachments. So these are the things you can specify in this container here. So I can say no repeat. I can now say write. And say write. Let me remove this from content to cover. Also, from content rather. And say write. I can put this to the center. This background position. Center. That's background position. Attachment wouldn't display right now. We don't have enough content for attachment. And already we saw what background color and how it works. So are we following? Any confusion so far? Or do we go ahead? Can we go ahead? Okay, so Priska, did you attend the class where we had a conversation around what's the name now? Images. So we did multimedia.
Yes, sir, I did. I was in attendance.
Okay, did you go over the videos? I think that was already handled in one of those classes. We actually talked about how we can actually get our directory handled. So this is me actually doing a directory model here. I want to go back to in these images folders. So it's more like I'm coming out of this index to go to this images folder. So I have to eventually come out completely. Images comes out. So double dot basically brings me out of this particular folder and takes me to the overall folder where everything else is. Now, please understand this. It is not bringing you to the root folder. The root folder is this folder, everything here. But why it's looking this way is because fortunately, everything here is already in the root folder. There could be a situation whereby the page you are working on is far from the root. So what double dot does for you is that it takes you out of your current file and brings you to the surface folder that you're working on right now at this point. So double dot brings me to this folder where I can access images, or I can access CSS. Do you get that? Did you get that?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Awesome. So that's it for background. That's it for background. So text directions is simple. Text direction is quite simple. There's not much to do in text direction. Text direction basically just specifies the direction. I don't know if anybody understands how Arabic is written. Arabic is written from right to left, if I'm not mistaken. So text direction is a one-way thing. Text direction. Either we have left to right, which is statutory, or we have right to left. So in this case, we are writing from right to left. So the write up, this write up is just coming, just like when you write a letter. So like when you write a letter, it just keeps going that way. That is it for direction. So by the time you analyze the use case for that and you know where you can apply that, you think about the use case for that and you think of where to apply that. So overflowing content. Overflowing content. So I'm going to manipulate something to
please, I
happen right
can't
now.
see your screen.
You can't see my screen. Everyone cannot see my
It's
screen.
it's as though it's lagging. I'm just seeing the style.css page.
Yes, me too. It just froze midway.
It's not moving.
Up to now.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
No.
When you talked about the text direction, I didn't get that. I didn't even see the text direction the direction you're talking about.
Okay. I would let me see how I can make that happen. Let me see how I can make that happen. Just hold on. I was using my second screen and hold on.
Your camera, your video is on.
But Jesus, my video was. How was it?
I have to stop. Let me stop sharing and reshare again. Okay. Can you see my screen now? Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I was talking about direction, and I said direction is a one-way thing. Direction is not complicated at all. It's a one-way thing. There is no complication in it. So this is it. We have direction, and then we can have either left to right, which is basic, which is normal, the normal English writing way, left to right. But in some weird situation, I don't know which, I've not explored the use case for direction. You can actually now have right to left. That's where you write like do you write in letter writing where you have your address right to left. And if you got that, so that's a one-way thing. There's no mental gymnastics about that. It's just direct. There's no plenty thinking. There's no plenty stress about that. It's as direct as that is. There's no personally. I'm not sure I've ever used that in any of my projects before. I'm not sure I've ever used it. Okay, I think I have several years ago. Yeah. So so let's talk about overflowing content very quickly. Overflowing content. So I'm going to have to make something happen here. So I'm going to change this from H1 text to P text. And I'm going to do something very intentional here. Dot P text height let me call this height 200 pixel. Background color. What color do we use? Aquamarine. Good. I think I have to reduce the color of the height of this guy so it doesn't stress us. Perfect. So this is the height. This paragraph is too high. Make 100 pixels, right? Now, it is easier to manage this box. You manage the content, and when the content is just this is a paragraph, so it's quite simple to manage. That is straightforward. But in a case where we have something like this, Laura, I'm going to Laura. That's too much. 3. In the case where we have content that becomes too much for the content, this never still too much for the content. Wow, great. I think I have to make do with these 8. Okay, just perfect. Now look at this. In this case, we have put in a content that is more than the container. This is what we call overflowing content. Now, it's funny, it could be worse if, for example, we also have a width set. So this is height 800, and then we say width 300 pixels also. Now, what will happen is it will look so cut, it will look so weird. At least the height, the width even looks so weird. So I will allow that. So it does it because it's too long already for our management. So how do we handle this? We have a value we call overflow. Now, why does CSS even allow element overflow like this? When the space reach, just cut it and throw it the remaining way. But the truth is, if it does like that, a lot of data loss will happen. So basically, the system would not want such data loss, right? Now, because it wouldn't want such data loss, it has to allow the system to overflow. But this overflow can be managed. How can we manage it? We use what we call the overflow property. Overflow property. So overflow property, as it sounds like this is more like a general value for all of it. Now, once you say overflow, it overflows both the x and the y-axis. Now, for the sake of those that might not be math inclined, this is the x-axis and this is the y-axis. And if you saw that, this is y-axis, like horizontal. Yes, this is vertically is y-axis, horizontally is x-axis. Now, when you set overflow, it sets the overflow value for both the x-axis and the y-axis. But you can decide to specify and say overflow y or overflow x. So if you overflow y, it only handles the overflow for the y-axis. If you set overflow x, it also just sets the overflow for the x-axis. Now, in this case, the overflow here is happening on our y-axis, not on our x-axis. It's happening on our y-axis. Now, I can now say overflow y, scroll. Overflow y, scroll. So what have I done? I've made sure that instead of overflowing and just filling the whole place, I can scroll within this container and still have my full data without any of them going missing. Now, but there are situations where, for example, your content, this rarely happens though, this space here becomes way too long. Cannot be way too long. Let me simulate something. I'm forced to simulate this. Right. Becomes way too long. Good. So let me try. I want to simulate something intentionally and see. It's still not this. My simulation is still not working. I have to force it. Let me force it. White space. No. Let me see if I can force it. White space wrap. Okay. White space, no wrap. Okay. So this is what happens now. I think I had to force it because it physically wraps and I don't want it to wrap. Now 600 pixels. What is it doing now? It has actually handled the both sides because the content is actually longer than if I don't put this overflow, let me show some. If I don't put this overflow, it just keeps going and going and going and going and going and going. So in situations where you find yourself where the content is bigger than the container, you use overflow to handle that particular structure, and that way you don't have to start dealing with contents that are bigger than the container. You just know what to do with it, and it fits into the container. Is that clarified? Where is that a hand I see? Was that a hand? A class, please go ahead.
Good evening. I wanted to ask, let's say you don't want it to scroll, but you just want maybe the background to overflow with the text. What would you type in the column after the overflow?
Okay, so in that particular case, you don't want it to overflow. You don't want it to overflow. You just want it to just keep going down and down and down, right?
Yes, you
Is that what
just
you
want
mean?
it to fill the
Is that what
background.
you're asking?
Like
Okay. Now
you see
you should
just
not.
the top part colored, but you
Okay.
want like the down one to also be colored. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Now I want you to also know. I want you to know something beforehand, that the reason that it actually overflowed in the first place was because this container has a specific height, right? Do you understand to that point? Do you know to that point? Hello, are you there?
Yes,
Hello?
I can hear you.
Do you understand to that point that the reason why there's actually an overflow in the first place is because this guy has a fixed height? Do you
Okay, yeah.
understand to that point?
Yes.
Good. Now, you have two ways to do it. If you actually need this height, right? You need this not height, sorry, not this height. You need this height. You certainly need it, right? This height, you need it. So what you would do is that you don't set it to be fixed. Now, how do you do it that you don't set it to be fixed? Let me increase this content, please. How would you even need to do it that the content won't be fixed? What you do is this. There are two ways you could achieve this. Remove this totally, remove the height totally. Or you can now, instead of using just height, use what we call minimum height. So when you set the minimum height, this is what happens. The minimum height records the system and says, no matter what it is, right? The height should be 100 pixels. Even if it's dot, the height should be 100 pixels. So even if I'm putting just, let me copy these guys out. When I put in just dot, the height will be 100 pixels. Why is it showing that minimum height? Oh, sorry, minimum height and maximum height. 100 pixels. Okay, good. So minimum, the minimum is 100 and the maximum is 200. What am I doing in this particular point now? Let's not confuse us. Let me go over this again slowly this time around. Minimum height sets a height for the system that it doesn't go below, no matter what exists here. It sets that height. While maximum height sets a height that should not be bypassed, no matter the content. Now, in some situations, the system itself bypasses the minimum height. In some situations, rarely it bypasses the minimum height. In a lot of situations, sometimes you just bypass it. But now, why am I putting this minimum height? I'm putting this because I want a situation whereby no matter the content here, it knows that the minimum height is 100 pixels, but it does not stick to 100 pixels. It has the opportunity to increase the height. That's why it can keep fitting in and fitting in. If I increase this content, it will keep going and keep going and keep going. I don't know if you got that in class.
Yeah, I get to know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's not like you're not adding anything to the overflow here. No, you're not doing that. You're just modifying the way you specified your height. That's just it. So I'll pick the last property and I'll give room for questions if there is any. And then if I would call it a night at this point, and then Friday. Please be reinformed on Saturday. You're writing a test. On Saturday you're writing a test. I hope we're aware of that. I hope we're aware of that. Are we aware of that? So we're quiet.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to talk about values and units very quickly. And I think I've done this before, so I'll just reiterate it. I'll just re-explain it. And then I'll call it a night, barring any questions. Barring any questions. So there's something we call values and units. Now, I've been writing 100 pixel, 100 px, 100 px. Sometimes I write 10 px, sometimes I write 20 px. So px is there are basically two kinds of units. We have the absolute units and we have the relative units. We have the absolute unit and we have the relative unit. I think I mentioned this in one of the classes we had. Absolute units are those that no matter the they're not affected by the size of any other element. They're the size, it is what it is. It's not affected by location, it's not affected by size of, if no matter the position you fix it, the size remains the same. The size would always remain the same. That is an absolute unit. But a relative unit modifies its size when it finds itself in a different dimension. So for example, the size is, for example, a relative unit has a relative unit of maybe 30 something. Let me just use 30 something, the name of that unit. Now, it will be 30 something. That 30 something size will look different in different places or different locations, just like the way a chameleon changes its colors with respect to its environment. So relative sizes change their shape with respect to the different containers they find themselves. Now, the three most popular relative values you find will be REM, EM, and percentage. We also have VW, VH. Yeah, let's add these two, VW and VH. Now, but pixel is basically an absolute unit. In fact, it's the most absolute of all absolute units. In this, we have cm, we have mm. These are basic. Centimeters and meters are basic too. Very, very basic. Very basic. Now, but big pixel is what we use on encoding basically. And 1 pixel, I think 1 pixel is 1/64, if I'm not mistaken, of 1 inch. If I'm not mistaken, it should be the calculation. If I am not mistaken, 1/64 of 1 inch. I would need to reconfirm this information, but I think this is what it is. 1/64 of 1 inch is 1 pixel. Now, when it now comes to the relative values, REM is a percentage. How do I put this now? It's a percentage rather of the font size. It's a percentage of the font size of the overall HTML font size. So notice that you can actually set a font size for your HTML. Say HTML font size 15 pixel. Now, if you set the HTML font size to be 15 pixel, and you now say p text should be font size. Let's do a little practical and see something. To REM, let's confirm something. What's the here? Absolute and relative. Okay, beautiful. I don't know if you can see what is showing here. It's showing font 30. Oh, it's showing font 30 pixels. Can we see that font? And there's a box showing p text, p.ptext, 30 pixel times New Roman. Why is it showing 30 pixel? This is why it's showing 30 pixel. Because the font size of my HTML is 15 pixel. And I'm saying the size of p text is font size 2 rem. So 2 rem is 2 times the size, the font size of this HTML. But in a case where I don't specify the HTML size completely, the HTML has a default size, which is actually 16 pixel. So the default size of your HTML is actually 16 pixel. So anything you are doing with REM, it automatically picks the size of your HTML and multiplies it in whatever case it finds out. So if it's 0.5 rem, for example, then that 0.5 rem is 0.5 of 16, which should one very tiny value, 8 pixels. That is REM. But for EM, that's this EM. EM now is not a bit, it's now not like the reverse, but EM is a little bit more specific. Now, EM is concerned about the container. So if, as this p text is, right? If, for example, this p text is in this container called main, and main has a font size, and I set the size of this p text with the EM unit, what it automatically does, just like REM, is relative to the font size of its parent. REM is relative to the font size of the overall HTML document, but EM is relative to the font size of its direct parent. Now, percentage basically still the same, practically the same thing as EM, is also relative to the size of its direct parent. One VH and one VW is 1% of the screen size. One VH is 1% of the screen size. So we know that if the screen size is 1024 pixels, one VH is 1% of 1024. Mathematicians, you please do that calculation. I can't do that calculation right now in my head. So that is, these are basically how the units work. It's quite easy to digest if you get this understanding. So rem is basically relative to the font size of the HTML. EM is relative to the font size of its direct parent. One VH, one VW is 1% of the width of the screen size. So it means that if we have 1.5 VW, we're having 1.5% of the view width. VW is actually view width. VH is view height. Yes. I think it's safe to pause at this point and take questions.
So I have a question.
Please go ahead.